There is something profoundly powerful about the conversations no one else hears. Before a single word leaves your mouth, before you make a decision, before you take a step toward your future, another voice has already been speaking inside your mind. That quiet conversation shapes your confidence, your courage, your relationships, and ultimately the direction of your life. Most people spend years trying to change their circumstances without realizing that the first battlefield is not around them, it is within them. Scripture reminds us that, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Long before our actions become visible, they begin as thoughts, beliefs, and silent assumptions. This is where many lives quietly drift off course. We often believe that failure comes from external obstacles, but far more often it begins with an inner narrative that has gone unquestioned. The enemy rarely starts by changing your circumstances. He begins by whispering doubts into your identity. You're not enough. You'll never change. God has forgotten you. If those lies are repeated often enough, they stop sounding like temptations and begin sounding like truth. Yet, they remain lies. The tragedy is not merely that we hear them, it is that we eventually begin to speak them to ourselves. Psychology has long recognized what Scripture declared. Centuries ago, the human mind tends to reinforce whatever it repeatedly believes. Negative thoughts become mental pathways. Fear becomes familiar. Disappointment starts defining expectation. A person who has experienced rejection may begin assuming every new relationship will end the same way. Someone who has failed once may quietly expect failure again before even trying. The mind seeks consistency, even when that consistency keeps us trapped. We mistake familiarity for reality. But faith interrupts that cycle. Faith is not pretending problems do not exist. Faith is choosing to let God's truth become louder than your fear. It is replacing destructive inner dialogue with promises that have stood the test of time. When your heart whispers that you are alone, faith reminds you that God has promised never to leave nor forsake his children. When anxiety predicts disaster, faith answers with the assurance that the Lord directs the steps of those who trust him. Every promise becomes a new sentence in the conversation taking place within your soul. C.S. Lewis observed that the direction of our lives is often determined by what we consistently love and believe. He understood that character is formed quietly, almost invisibly, through countless small choices made when no one is watching. Every thought you choose to entertain is shaping the person you are becoming. Every time you replace bitterness with gratitude, fear with trust, or pride with humility, you are strengthening your inner foundation. No applause accompanies these victories, but they are the victories that matter most. Consider how Jesus often spoke to people before he changed their circumstances. Again and again his first words were, "Do not be afraid." Why? Because fear distorts vision. A fearful heart cannot clearly recognize opportunity, purpose, or even God's presence. Before the miracle appeared, Christ restored perspective. Before healing the body, he often healed hope. Heaven understands that transformation begins on the inside long before it becomes visible on the outside. This explains why truly unstoppable people appear calm in situations that overwhelm others. Their strength is not found in having easier lives, but in possessing stronger inner conversations. While others rehearse reasons to quit, they quietly remember reasons to continue. While the world measures success by outward achievement, God first looks at the condition of the heart. A peaceful spirit is stronger than an anxious mind, because peace allows wisdom to speak where panic only creates confusion. Perhaps today you have been speaking words over yourself that God has never spoken over you. Perhaps you have accepted labels that were born from failure, rejection, or disappointment, rather than from your Creator. If so, today is an invitation to begin a different conversation. Instead of repeating what fear has taught you, begin repeating what God has promised. Fill your mind with truth until it becomes more familiar than doubt. Speak gratitude before complaints. Speak hope before despair. Speak purpose before confusion. Over time, these quiet choices reshape not only your thinking but your entire life. The remarkable truth is that no one else may notice this transformation at first. There may be no dramatic announcement, no instant applause, and no visible change overnight. Yet beneath the surface, something extraordinary is happening. The roots of your character are growing deeper. Your faith is becoming steadier. Your confidence is no longer dependent on circumstances but anchored in God's unchanging truth. And when life's storms eventually come, as they always do, you will discover that the strongest people are not those who avoided difficulty, but those who learned to master the silent conversation within. Because every unstoppable life begins long before the first visible victory. It begins in the quiet place where the soul decides which voice it will believe. There is a quiet deception that has captured much of the modern world. We have been taught to chase moments of inspiration while neglecting the daily disciplines that actually shape a meaningful life. We wait to feel motivated before we act. We imagine that extraordinary people possess extraordinary enthusiasm every morning. But if you look closely at the lives of those who leave a lasting impact, you will discover something surprising. Their greatest strength is rarely intense emotion. It is quiet consistency. This truth appears throughout Scripture. God rarely transforms a life in a single dramatic moment. Instead, he works through daily obedience. Noah built the ark one day at a time. David cared for sheep long before he wore a crown. Joseph faithfully served in slavery and prison before standing in Pharaoh's palace. Their stories contain remarkable miracles, but those miracles were surrounded by years of ordinary faithfulness. The extraordinary was built upon countless ordinary days. Human nature, however, prefers excitement. Our minds are drawn toward dramatic breakthroughs because they promise immediate results. We enjoy the emotional high of a new beginning, a fresh commitment, or an inspiring message. Yet emotions are temporary visitors. They come and go like changing weather. If your actions depend entirely upon how you feel, your progress will rise and fall with your emotions. Discipline, on the other hand, remains when feelings disappear. It quietly continues doing what is right even when no excitement remains. Psychologists often describe this through the power of habits. Every repeated action strengthens a pathway in the brain. The more often a behavior is practiced, the more natural it becomes. This explains why both healthy and unhealthy habits grow stronger over time. Small choices may appear insignificant today, but they are silently shaping tomorrow's character. The person who chooses kindness every day becomes compassionate almost without noticing. The person who consistently chooses bitterness eventually sees the world through resentment. Tiny decisions, repeated faithfully, become powerful forces. Faith understands this principle deeply. Spiritual maturity is not measured by occasional emotional experiences, but by continual faithfulness. Prayer is powerful not because it happens once, but because it becomes a daily conversation with God. Reading Scripture changes us not through a single verse, but through years of allowing God's truth to reshape our thinking. Worship becomes transformative when it moves beyond Sunday mornings and becomes the attitude of an entire life. C.S. Lewis once suggested that every choice gradually turns us into a certain kind of person. We are always becoming something. Every decision moves us either closer to the character God desires or further away from it. That is why consistency matters so much. You may not notice the change after one day of faithful obedience, just as you cannot see a tree grow by watching it for an hour. But return after months or years, and the difference is undeniable. Growth is often invisible while it is happening, yet unmistakable once it has taken root. Consider the farmer who plants seeds. He does not dig them up every morning to check whether they are growing. He waters them, protects them, and patiently trusts the process. Much of the work happens beneath the soil where human eyes cannot see it. God's work in your life follows a similar pattern. There are seasons when you may feel as though nothing is changing. Your prayers seem ordinary. Your efforts appear unnoticed. Your progress feels slow. Yet beneath the surface, God is strengthening your character, deepening your faith, and preparing you for responsibilities you cannot yet imagine. This is why the enemy often attacks consistency instead of dramatic moments. He understands that if he can persuade you to quit the small daily habits of faith, he can slowly weaken your spiritual foundation. He whispers that your prayers are making no difference, that your acts of obedience are too insignificant to matter, or that your progress is too slow to continue. powerful truth. God values faithfulness far more than sudden excitement. Imagine how differently your life would unfold if you stopped waiting for perfect motivation and simply remained faithful each day. Instead of asking whether you feel inspired, ask whether your next step honors God. Instead of chasing constant emotional highs, pursue steady obedience. One prayer today, one act of kindness today, one moment of forgiveness today, one chapter of scripture today. These simple actions may seem small, but heaven measures them differently than the world does. The most unstoppable people are not those who live extraordinary days every once in a while. They are those who faithfully live ordinary days with extraordinary commitment. Their strength is built quietly, decision by decision, long before anyone notices the results. By the time success becomes visible, the real victory has already been won in thousands of unseen moments of perseverance. So do not underestimate today's small acts of obedience. Do not despise the quiet routines that seem insignificant. Every faithful step is laying another stone in the foundation God is building within you. And when the storms of life arrive, as they surely will, you will discover that what made you unstoppable was never a single moment of excitement. It was the quiet habit of consistency, practiced one faithful day at a time until it became the very character of your soul. There is a kind of strength the world rarely celebrates because it cannot be easily seen. It is not the strength of speaking the loudest, winning every argument, or proving yourself to every critic. It is the strength of protecting your inner peace when everything around you is trying to steal it. In a culture that rewards constant reaction, the truly unstoppable person learns the quiet habit of remaining anchored. They understand that peace is not weakness, it is power under control. Many people spend their lives believing that every challenge deserves an immediate response. Every insult must be answered. Every accusation must be defended. Every disagreement must become a battle. But wisdom teaches something entirely different. Not every invitation to conflict deserves your acceptance. Sometimes the greatest victory is walking away with your peace still intact. Jesus himself demonstrated this repeatedly. There were moments when he answered his critics with remarkable wisdom, and there were other moments when he chose complete silence. His silence was never surrender. It was confidence. He understood that truth does not become stronger because it argues louder. This reveals something important about the human mind. Psychology tells us that our brains are naturally drawn toward negativity. We remember criticism longer than compliments. One painful comment can overshadow 10 encouraging words. This tendency, often called the negativity bias, was designed to help human beings recognize danger. Yet when left unchecked, it causes us to carry unnecessary emotional burdens. We replay conversations that ended days ago. We imagine arguments that never happen. We allow temporary frustrations to occupy permanent space in our hearts. Eventually, our peace disappears, not because life became impossible, but because our attention remained fixed on what was draining us. The enemy understands this better than many people realize. He does not always need to destroy your faith if he can simply distract your focus. A distracted believer becomes an exhausted believer. An exhausted believer struggles to hear God's voice because the noise of anxiety becomes louder than the whisper of truth. This is why Scripture repeatedly encourages us to guard our hearts. The heart is not merely the center of emotion, it is the place from which decisions, attitudes, and actions flow. If your peace is constantly being stolen, your clarity soon follows. Faith offers a completely different way of living. It invites us to surrender what we cannot control and to faithfully manage what we can. There are circumstances beyond your influence. You cannot control how others speak about you. You cannot force people to understand your intentions. You cannot prevent every disappointment or every misunderstanding, but you can choose how much access those things have to your inner world. That choice becomes one of the greatest demonstrations of spiritual maturity. C.S. Lewis often wrote that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. The same principle applies to peace. A peaceful person is not someone who never experiences difficulty. They simply refuse to make themselves the center of every conflict. They no longer feel the need to defend their pride at every opportunity. Their identity has become secure enough in God that the opinions of people no longer determine the condition of their soul. Think about the Sea of Galilee during a storm. The waves crashed violently against the boat, and the disciples believed they were about to perish. Yet Jesus was asleep. His peace did not come from calm circumstances, it came from complete confidence in his Father's authority. The storm was real, but it did not have permission to rule his heart. That same invitation exists for every believer today. Peace is not the absence of storms. Peace is the presence of God within them. Imagine how differently your days would unfold if you truly protected your peace as one of heaven's greatest gifts. You would stop carrying offenses that God never asked you to keep. You would stop allowing social media, endless comparisons, and constant negativity to dictate your emotional state. You would become slower to anger, quicker to forgive, and far less anxious about things beyond your control. Your decisions would become wiser because fear would no longer be making them for you. This does not mean ignoring injustice or pretending problems do not exist. Jesus confronted evil when necessary. He spoke truth with courage. But he never allowed chaos to become contagious within his own heart. He remained rooted in his mission, refusing to let distractions pull him away from his purpose. That is the difference between reacting emotionally and responding wisely. One is controlled by circumstances, the other is guided by conviction. The most unstoppable people are not those who never face conflict. They are those who refuse to let conflict define them. They understand that peace is a treasure too valuable to exchange for temporary arguments, wounded pride, or endless worry. Every day, they quietly choose forgiveness over bitterness, trust over fear, gratitude over complaint, and faith over panic. These choices may seem small, but together they create an inner stability that nothing in this world can easily shake. So guard your peace with intention. Be careful what voices you allow into your mind, what burdens you continue carrying, and what battles you choose to fight. Every unnecessary distraction steals energy from the purpose God has placed before you. When your heart remains anchored in His presence, you become stronger than the storms surrounding you. And that is one of the quiet habits that turns an ordinary person into an unstoppable force, not because life becomes easier, but because nothing outside can overcome the peace God has established within. There is a season in almost every meaningful life that feels invisible. A season when prayers seem unanswered, progress appears painfully slow, and nothing about your circumstances suggests that anything significant is happening. It is during these moments that many people become discouraged. They assume silence means abandonment, delay means denial, and waiting means failure. Yet Scripture reveals a very different reality. Some of God's greatest work is accomplished in seasons where almost nothing appears to be happening. Human beings naturally measure progress by what they can immediately see. We celebrate visible success, public recognition, and dramatic breakthroughs. But God often works in the opposite direction. Before He raises a leader, He develops a servant. Before He entrusts someone with influence, He strengthens their character. Before He opens the door everyone can see, He prepares the heart that will walk through it. Heaven is never in a hurry because God values lasting transformation more than temporary success. Think about a seed buried beneath the soil. To anyone standing above the ground, it appears lifeless. Days pass, weeks pass. There is no visible evidence that anything is changing. But beneath the surface, the seed is not dying. It is developing roots. Those hidden roots determine whether the tree will survive future storms. If growth happened only above the ground without first growing below it, the first strong wind would destroy everything. Your spiritual life often follows that same pattern. There are moments when you wonder why your prayers have not yet been answered. You remain faithful. You continue trusting. Yet life seems unchanged. During those seasons, it becomes tempting to believe that God has forgotten you. But what if He is not delaying your blessing? What if He is deepening your foundation? What if the very waiting you dislike is becoming the reason you will be able to sustain the blessing when it finally arrives? Psychology offers an interesting insight here. Researchers often speak about the hidden process of growth. Whether someone is learning a language, mastering an instrument, or developing emotional resilience, improvement is rarely noticeable from one day to the next. The brain quietly builds new connections through repetition. Then, almost unexpectedly, the skill begins to appear. What seemed like no progress was actually preparation. Growth was taking place long before it became visible. Faith works in much the same way. The Bible is filled with people whose greatest preparation happened in hidden places. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness before leading Israel. David cared for sheep long before wearing a crown. Joseph endured betrayal, slavery, and prison before standing beside Pharaoh. Even Jesus spent decades in ordinary, quiet life before beginning his public ministry. None of those hidden years were wasted. They were God's classroom. They shaped humility, wisdom, patience, and complete dependence upon the Father. C.S. Lewis once suggested that God is more interested in what we are becoming than simply in what we accomplish. That truth changes everything. If success arrived before character was mature enough to handle it, success itself could become destructive. God sometimes protects us through preparation. He delays not because he enjoys waiting, but because he loves us enough to prepare us completely. The danger is that hidden seasons often tempt us to quit too soon. We compare our lives to others whose harvest appears visible, while forgetting that we cannot see the years of unseen preparation behind their success. Comparison blinds us to God's unique work in our own journey. The gardener never expects every tree to bloom on the same day. Each grows according to its design, its purpose, and its season. Why should we expect our spiritual lives to unfold differently? Imagine approaching your current season with a completely different perspective. Instead of asking, "Why is nothing happening?" you begin asking, "Lord, what are you growing within me?" Instead of measuring progress only by external results, you start noticing internal transformation. Perhaps you have become more patient than you were a year ago, more forgiving, more peaceful, more dependent on God than on your own understanding. Those changes may seem invisible to the world, but heaven sees them as extraordinary victories. This is why James encourages believers to consider trials with joy, not because suffering is enjoyable, but because perseverance produces maturity. Every difficulty becomes an opportunity for deeper faith. Every delay becomes another invitation to trust God's timing rather than our own. Every hidden season quietly strengthens the soul for responsibilities still ahead. The most unstoppable people understand something the world often overlooks. They know that roots matter more than branches. They value becoming over appearing. They refuse to despise the quiet seasons because they understand those are often the places where God performs his deepest work. While others become impatient and abandon the process, they remain faithful. While others demand immediate answers, they continue walking in trust. One day, the breakthrough finally arrives. Doors begin opening, opportunities appear. Others look at your life and call it sudden success. They see the fruit but never witness the years of hidden roots. They celebrate the visible blessing without realizing it was built during countless ordinary days when only God knew what was happening beneath the surface. So if you find yourself in a hidden season today, do not mistake silence for absence. Do not confuse waiting with failure. The God who created forests from tiny seeds is still working where human eyes cannot see. Every quiet act of obedience, every faithful prayer, every unseen sacrifice is strengthening your foundation. And when the time is right, what has been growing in secret will emerge with a strength that no storm can easily shake. Because God's greatest masterpieces are almost always formed in places the world overlooks, until the moment he chooses to reveal them. There is a remarkable paradox at the heart of the Christian life. The world teaches that greatness comes from being noticed, admired, and applauded. It tells us to build our reputation, promote our achievements, and make sure our voices are heard above everyone else's. Yet Jesus presented an entirely different vision of greatness. He declared that whoever desires to become great must first become a servant. At first glance, this seems completely opposite to human instinct. How can serving others make someone unstoppable? Yet history repeatedly demonstrates that the people who leave the deepest impact are rarely those who sought attention. They are those who quietly gave themselves away. Human nature longs for recognition. There is nothing unusual about wanting to be appreciated. God created us for relationship, and encouragement strengthens the human spirit. The problem begins when recognition becomes our motivation rather than our byproduct. When every act of kindness is performed only to receive praise, disappointment quickly follows. People fail to notice our efforts. Gratitude is forgotten. Expectations go unmet. Before long, bitterness begins replacing generosity because we were serving for applause instead of serving from love. Jesus never built his ministry around gaining popularity. In fact, there were moments when he deliberately walked away from crowds who wanted to make him famous. Instead, he invested deeply in ordinary people. He touched lepers no one else would approach. He listened to those society ignored. He washed the feet of his own disciples on the night before his crucifixion. Imagine the creator of the universe kneeling before fishermen, performing the work usually reserved for servants. If greatness were measured by status, that moment would seem insignificant. But heaven measures greatness differently. In God's kingdom, humility is never weakness. It is strength expressed through love. Psychology offers a fascinating perspective on this principle. Research consistently shows that people who regularly help others experience greater emotional well-being, stronger relationships, and a deeper sense of purpose. Acts of generosity reduce isolation, increase gratitude, and strengthen resilience during difficult seasons. Why? Because serving shifts our attention away from ourselves. Anxiety often grows when we become consumed by our own problems. Service reminds us that life is larger than our personal struggles. It reconnects us with meaning beyond comfort. C.S. Lewis once observed that true humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. That single idea transforms the way we understand service. Humility does not mean believing you have no value. It means becoming so secure in God's love that you no longer need constant validation from other people. Your identity is rooted in being God's child rather than in being the center of attention. Once that foundation is secure, serving others becomes an expression of freedom instead of a strategy for approval. This is why the enemy often encourages pride in subtle ways. He whispers that your worth depends on how many people recognize you, praise you, or acknowledge your accomplishments. If recognition disappears, he convinces you that your life no longer matters. But Scripture repeatedly reminds us that God sees what people overlook. Jesus taught that even a cup of cold water given in his name is noticed by heaven. Nothing done in genuine love is ever wasted. Human applause fades quickly, but God's reward is eternal. Think about a tree standing beside a road. Travelers enjoy its shade. Birds build nests in its branches, and hungry people eat its fruit. The tree never demands gratitude. It simply continues fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. In many ways, this reflects the quiet beauty of a life surrendered to God. A servant-hearted person becomes a source of encouragement, wisdom, and compassion without constantly asking what they will receive in return. They understand that influence grows naturally wherever genuine love is practiced consistently. Imagine how different your relationships would become if your first question each day was not, "How can people appreciate me?" but, "How can I reflect Christ to someone today?" Perhaps it is offering a listening ear to a discouraged friend. Perhaps it is forgiving someone who never apologized. Perhaps it is encouraging a stranger, helping a neighbor, or praying for someone who will never know your name. These moments rarely attract attention, but they shape the soul in ways that public recognition never could. The most unstoppable people quietly understand a secret that many spend their entire lives chasing. Influence is earned through character, not self-promotion. Trust is built through consistent love, not impressive speeches. Leadership grows out of service, not status. Long before David became king, he faithfully served his father by caring for sheep. Long before Joseph governed Egypt, he faithfully served in prison. Long before the apostles transformed the world, they learned to follow Jesus in ordinary, unseen moments. Their willingness to serve prepared them for responsibilities they could never have imagined. Perhaps today God is inviting you into that same quiet habit. Stop measuring your life by how often you are recognized. Instead, measure it by how faithfully you love. Every unseen act of kindness, every quiet sacrifice, every moment of compassion is planting seeds that God Himself promises to remember. You may never know how deeply your encouragement changes another person's life. You may never fully understand how one act of obedience becomes the answer to someone else's prayer, but heaven sees every detail. One day people may call you influential, successful, or even unstoppable. They may admire the fruit of your life without realizing where it began. The truth is that your greatest strength was never built through seeking recognition. It was built through quietly serving others when no one was watching. Because in God's kingdom, the hands that willingly serve become the hands He powerfully uses. And those who faithfully lift others often discover that God has been lifting them all along.